The Watson sisters, 14-year-old Emma and 16-year-old Sarah, were experienced swimmers who knew every inch of Sunset Beach, where their family had vacationed for years. When they failed to return from their morning swim on that perfect July day in 2023, their mother Jessica assumed they had simply lost track of time exploring the tide pools they loved so much. But as hours turned into a frantic search involving Coast Guard helicopters and dive teams, it became clear that the girls had vanished without a trace. 10 months later, Jessica received a phone call from a commercial fisherman named Captain Rodriguez that would change everything she thought she knew about her daughter's disappearance. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Jessica Watson had been bringing her daughters to Sunset Beach every summer since they were toddlers. The small coastal town of Monterey Bay, California, had become like a second home to their family. The girls had learned to swim in these waters, had built countless sand castles on this shore, and had spent years exploring every tide pool, every rocky outcropping, and every hidden cove along the coastline. Emma Watson, at 14, was the younger of the two sisters, but arguably the stronger swimmer. She had been on her high school's junior varsity swim team since she was 12 and had recently qualified for several state-level competitions. Emma was fearless in the water, often swimming farther from shore than her more cautious older sister, but she was also sensible about ocean safety and had never given her parents cause for worry. Sarah Watson, 16, was more interested in marine biology than competitive swimming, but she was still an accomplished swimmer who felt completely comfortable in ocean waters. Sarah loved exploring the underwater world of Sunset Beach, and she could hold her breath longer than most adults while diving down to examine sea life among the rocky reefs near the shore. The family had been staying at their usual beachfront rental cottage for the first week of July 2023. It was a tradition that had started when Jessica's late husband Robert was still alive, and Jessica had continued bringing the girls to Sunset Beach every summer as a way of maintaining their connection to his memory and to the place where they had shared so many happy family moments. Robert Watson had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, when Emma was 11 and Sarah was 13. The loss had been devastating for the family, but the annual trips to Sunset Beach had provided a sense of continuity and healing. The girls especially treasured these summer weeks, which reminded them of the times when their father would join them in the water and teach them about ocean currents, marine life, and water safety. On the morning of July 15, 2023, Jessica woke early to prepare breakfast for the girls before their traditional morning swim. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, calm seas, and a gentle onshore breeze that created ideal conditions for swimming and beach activities. Emma and Sarah had planned to swim to their favorite spot about 300 yards from shore, where a series of underwater rock formations created interesting diving opportunities and attracted various species of fish that Sarah loved to observe. They had made this same swim dozens of times over the years, and Jessica had no concerns about their safety. "We'll be back in about an hour, Mom," Sarah had called out as the girls walked down to the water's edge at approximately 8:30 a.m. "Emma wants to practice some distance swimming, and I want to check out the tide pools on the north side." Jessica waved goodbye from the cottage deck where she was enjoying her morning coffee and watching the girls enter the water. The beach was already beginning to fill with early morning joggers, dog walkers, and other swimmers, creating the safe, supervised environment that had made Jessica comfortable with the girls' swimming routine over the years. Emma and Sarah entered the water together, swimming side by side with the strong, confident strokes that came from years of experience in these waters. Jessica watched them progress steadily toward their usual destination, occasionally catching glimpses of their heads above the waves as they made their way through the gentle swells. After about 10 minutes, Jessica lost sight of the girls as they moved beyond the area visible from the cottage deck. This was normal and expected. The rock formations where the girls liked to swim were not visible from their accommodation, and Jessica typically used the time to prepare lunch or catch up on reading. At 9:45 a.m., Jessica began watching for the girls' return. They had said they would be back in about an hour, and while they occasionally extended their swims by 15 or 20 minutes, they were generally reliable about returning when they said they would. By 10:15 a.m., Jessica was starting to feel the first stirrings of concern. The girls knew that breakfast was waiting for them, and they were usually eager to eat after their morning exercise. Jessica walked down to the water's edge and scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of the girls swimming back toward shore. The ocean appeared calm and empty in the area where Emma and Sarah usually swam. Jessica could see a few other swimmers much closer to shore, and there were several boats visible in the distance, but no sign of her daughters. At 10:30 a.m., Jessica decided to walk along the beach toward the area where the girls typically spent their time. She thought they might have decided to explore the tide pools longer than usual, or perhaps they had gotten involved in watching some interesting marine life and had lost track of time. The walk to the rock formations took Jessica about 15 minutes. When she arrived at the area where the girls usually swam, she found several other beachgoers enjoying the tide pools and snorkeling in the clear water, but no sign of Emma and Sarah. Jessica began asking other people in the area whether they had seen two teenage girls swimming earlier that morning. A few people remembered seeing girls who matched Emma and Sarah's description, but no one had noticed them recently or could provide any information about where they might have gone. Growing increasingly worried, Jessica called out her daughters' names, hoping they might be exploring a hidden cove or might be somewhere nearby where they could hear her voice. Her calls echoed off the rocky coastline, but there was no response. By 11:00 a.m., Jessica was genuinely frightened. The girls had never been gone this long without checking in, and it was completely unlike them to ignore their planned return time. Jessica called Emma's cell phone, which went directly to voicemail. Not surprising, since the girls typically left their phones at the cottage when they went swimming. Jessica hurried back to the cottage to check whether the girls had returned while she was searching for them. The cottage was empty, with their phones, clothes, and personal belongings exactly where they had left them before going swimming. At 11:15 a.m., Jessica called 911 to report her daughters as missing. The emergency dispatcher took her information and assured her that search and rescue teams would be deployed immediately to look for the girls. Within 30 minutes, Jessica could see Coast Guard helicopters arriving in the area, and she watched as several rescue boats began systematic searches of the waters around Sunset Beach. The local sheriff's department also arrived to coordinate the land-based search and to interview Jessica about the circumstances of the girls' disappearance. Sheriff Deputy Martinez, who took Jessica's initial statement, was experienced in water-related emergencies and tried to reassure Jessica while gathering the information needed to coordinate an effective search. "Mrs. Watson, I know this is terrifying, but we've handled many situations like this over the years," Deputy Martinez told Jessica. "Often when experienced swimmers like your daughters go missing, it's because they've encountered a situation that has taken them farther from their intended location than they planned to go. They might have been caught in an unexpected current, or they might have decided to help someone else who was in trouble." The Coast Guard search coordinator, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, explained to Jessica that the search would cover a much larger area than where the girls had planned to swim, taking into account ocean currents, weather conditions, and the time that had elapsed since they were last seen. "We're going to search systematically, starting with the area where your daughters intended to swim and expanding outward from there," Commander Chen explained. "We'll also be checking all the beaches and coves along this stretch of coastline, in case the girls were able to make it to shore somewhere and are waiting for help." As the afternoon progressed, the search expanded to include dozens of boats, multiple helicopters, and teams of searchers combing the coastline on foot. Local volunteers joined the effort, and word spread throughout the community that two teenage girls were missing from Sunset Beach. Jessica spent the day alternating between the beach, where she could watch the search operations, and the cottage, where she answered questions from investigators and waited desperately for news about her daughters. The search continued throughout the night, with Coast Guard vessels using searchlights and thermal imaging equipment to scan the waters. Despite the intensive effort, no trace of Emma and Sarah was found during the first 24 hours of searching. By the second day, the search had expanded to cover over 100 square miles of ocean. Additional resources were brought in from neighboring Coast Guard stations, and the California Highway Patrol provided additional helicopter support for the effort. Jessica was interviewed extensively by investigators who wanted to understand everything about the girls' swimming routine. their experience level, and any factors that might have contributed to their disappearance. She provided detailed information about Emma and Sarah's swimming abilities, their familiarity with the area, and their typical behavior during their morning swims. These girls were not reckless, Jessica emphasized to investigators. They were experienced, cautious swimmers who knew these waters better than most adults. They would never have taken unnecessary risks or swum farther from shore than they felt comfortable handling. The investigation revealed that Emma and Sarah were indeed skilled swimmers with extensive ocean experience. Their swim coaches and instructors confirmed that both girls were strong swimmers who understood ocean safety and had never exhibited poor judgment in the water. On the third day of searching, dive teams were brought in to search the underwater areas around the rock formations where the girls had planned to swim. The divers found the area to be relatively safe, with no dangerous underwater hazards that would have posed unusual risks to experienced swimmers. The dive teams did discover that the underwater topography in the area was more complex than it appeared from the surface, with several underwater caves and crevices that could potentially trap a swimmer who became disoriented. However, these features were at depths that would have required deliberate diving to reach, and they were not in locations where the girls would have encountered them during normal surface swimming. Despite the exhaustive search effort, no physical evidence of the girls had been found. No clothing, no personal items, no signs of struggle, and no witnesses who had seen anything unusual on the morning of July 15. The official search was scaled back after 2 weeks, though Coast Guard vessels continued to keep watch for any signs of the missing girls during their regular patrols. The case remained open, and Jessica was assured that any new information or evidence would trigger a renewed search effort. Jessica was devastated by the suspension of active searching. She couldn't understand how 2 experienced swimmers could simply vanish without leaving any trace in waters they knew so well. She refused to accept the possibility that Emma and Sarah had drowned, especially since their bodies hadn't been recovered despite extensive search efforts. "I know my daughters," Jessica told reporters during a press conference organized to maintain media attention on the case. "They are strong swimmers, they are smart, and they are survivors. They are out there somewhere, and I'm not going to stop looking for them." Jessica hired private investigators and organized volunteer search efforts that continued long after the official search had been suspended. She distributed flyers throughout California and neighboring states, hoping that someone might have seen the girls or might have information about what had happened to them. The case attracted significant media attention, with Emma and Sarah's disappearance being featured on several national television programs about missing persons. The mysterious nature of their disappearance, 2 experienced swimmers vanishing from a familiar beach in perfect conditions, captured public imagination and generated hundreds of tips and potential leads. Each tip was investigated thoroughly, but none provided any useful information about the girls' fate. Reported sightings of Emma and Sarah came from across the country, but when investigators followed up, the sightings invariably turned out to involve other young women who resembled the missing sisters. 3 months after the disappearance, Jessica received what she initially thought might be a breakthrough. A woman in Oregon called to report that she had seen 2 teenage girls who matched Emma and Sarah's description at a rest stop along Interstate 5. Jessica immediately contacted law enforcement, and investigators quickly responded to the report. However, surveillance footage from the rest stop showed that while 2 teenage girls had indeed been there with an adult man, they were not Emma and Sarah. The resemblance had been coincidental, and the girls in the footage were later identified as the man's daughters who were traveling with him on a legitimate family trip. Similar false leads continued to emerge regularly, each one raising Jessica's hopes momentarily, before ultimately proving to be unrelated to her daughter's disappearance. The emotional roller coaster of these false leads was exhausting for Jessica, but she continued to follow up on every potential sighting, no matter how remote the possibility that it might be connected to Emma and Sarah. 6 months after the girls disappeared, Jessica made the difficult decision to return to Sunset Beach. She had been avoiding the location where she had last seen her daughters, but she felt drawn to go back, hoping that being there might provide some insight into what had happened, or might trigger some memory that could be helpful to investigators. Walking the beach where Emma and Sarah had vanished was emotionally overwhelming for Jessica. She retraced their steps from the cottage to the water's edge, remembering their final conversation and watching the place where she had last seen them swimming toward their favorite spot. Jessica spent hours at the rock formations where the girls had planned to swim, talking to other beachgoers and trying to understand what might have happened in this location. The area appeared as safe and familiar as it had always been, providing no clues about how two experienced swimmers could have vanished so completely. During her time at Sunset Beach, Jessica met with local fishermen and boat captains who worked in the waters where Emma and Sarah had disappeared. She hoped that people who spent their time on the ocean might have observed something that hadn't been reported to investigators. Most of the fishermen she spoke with remembered the search efforts from 6 months earlier and expressed sympathy for Jessica's situation. Several of them had participated in the volunteer search efforts and had continued to keep watch for any signs of the missing girls during their regular fishing activities. One fisherman, an elderly man named Captain Torres, who had been working these waters for over 40 years, offered a theory that Jessica found both troubling and intriguing. "Mrs. Watson, I've seen a lot of things happen on the ocean over the years," Captain Torres told her. "Sometimes currents can behave in unexpected ways, especially around these rock formations. It's possible that your daughters encountered a current that pulled them farther from shore than they expected, and they might have ended up in waters where they couldn't be seen from the beach." Captain Torres explained that there were occasional reports of unusual current patterns in the area, particularly during certain tidal conditions. While these currents weren't normally dangerous for experienced swimmers, they could potentially carry someone much farther from shore than anticipated. "The thing is," Torres continued, "if your daughters got caught in one of these currents, they might have ended up miles from where anyone was searching. They might have made it to shore somewhere along the coast, or they might have been picked up by a boat that didn't realize they were missing persons." This theory provided Jessica with some hope that her daughters might still be alive somewhere. But it also highlighted how vast and unpredictable the ocean could be. If Emma and Sarah had been carried away by unexpected currents, they could have ended up almost anywhere along the California coast or even farther away. Jessica shared Captain Torres's theory with investigators, who acknowledged that unusual currents could have affected the girls' fate, but pointed out that extensive searches had been conducted along the entire coastline, without finding any trace of them. 8 months after Emma and Sarah's disappearance, Jessica received a call from Detective Ray Morales of the Monterey Bay Police Department. Morales had been assigned to review cold cases, including the Watson sisters' disappearance, to see if any new investigative approaches might be applicable. "Mrs. Watson, I've been going through your daughter's case file, and I wanted to ask you about something that might seem unusual," Detective Morales told Jessica during their phone conversation. "Have you ever considered the possibility that your daughter's disappearance might not have been accidental?" The question took Jessica by surprise. Throughout the investigation, the focus had been on the possibility that Emma and Sarah had encountered some kind of swimming accident or had been caught in unexpected ocean conditions. The idea that their disappearance might have been intentional or criminal hadn't been seriously explored. Detective Morales explained that he had been reviewing similar cases from other coastal areas and had noticed some patterns that concerned him. There had been several other cases over the past few years where experienced swimmers had disappeared from beaches under mysterious circumstances, and some of those cases had eventually been linked to criminal activity. "I'm not saying that's definitely what happened to Emma and Sarah," Morales clarified, "but I think we should consider the possibility that their disappearance might have been the result of foul play rather than an accident." This conversation opened up an entirely new dimension to the investigation. If Emma and Sarah had been taken by someone, it would explain why no trace of them had been found in the ocean, despite extensive search efforts. It would also mean that they might still be alive somewhere, possibly being held against their will. Detective Morales began investigating the possibility that the Watson sisters had been victims of human trafficking or abduction. He looked into reports of suspicious boat activity in the area around the time of their disappearance and examined whether there had been any other unusual incidents at Sunset Beach that might be connected to their case. 9 months after Emma and Sarah vanished, Jessica had learned to live with the constant uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to her daughters. She had taken leave from her job as a nurse to focus on the search efforts, and she had become involved with organizations that supported families of missing persons. Through these organizations, Jessica met other parents who were dealing with similar situations. She found some comfort in connecting with people who understood the unique anguish of not knowing whether their children were alive or dead. But she also learned about the long-term emotional challenges faced by families of missing persons. Jessica continued to maintain the cottage at Sunset Beach, hoping that Emma and Sarah might somehow find their way back to the place where they had disappeared. She spent weekends there walking the beach and talking to visitors, hoping that someone might provide a clue about what had happened to her daughters. On March 18, 2024, exactly 10 months and 3 days after Emma and Sarah had disappeared, Jessica's phone rang while she was having breakfast at the Sunset Beach cottage. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer, thinking it might be another reporter or someone calling about a false sighting of her daughters. But something prompted Jessica to take the call, and when she answered, she heard the voice of a man with a slight Spanish accent, who identified himself as Captain Miguel Rodriguez. "Mrs. Watson, my name is Miguel Rodriguez, and I'm a commercial fisherman, working out of San Diego," the man said. "I believe I have information about your daughters Emma and Sarah Watson." Jessica's heart began racing as she processed what she was hearing. After 10 months of false leads and dead ends, she had learned to be cautious about getting her hopes up. But something about Captain Rodriguez's voice suggested that this call might be different. "What kind of information?" Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Watson, I need to explain something to you that's going to be difficult to hear," Rodriguez said. 3 days ago, my fishing crew and I were working in international waters, about 150 miles southwest of San Diego. We came across a small boat that appeared to be in distress, and when we approached to offer assistance, we discovered 2 young women on board who matched the descriptions of your daughters. Jessica felt the room spinning around her as she tried to process what Captain Rodriguez was telling her. After 10 months of searching and uncertainty, was it possible that someone had finally found Emma and Sarah? Are they okay?" Jessica managed to ask. "They're alive, Mrs. Watson, but they're in rough condition," Rodriguez replied. "They appear to have been held captive for a long time, and they're in need of medical attention. We've brought them to a hospital in Tijuana, Mexico, and they're being cared for by doctors there." Jessica could barely speak as the magnitude of what she was hearing sank in. Her daughters were alive. After 10 months of not knowing whether they were dead or alive, Emma and Sarah had been found. But Rodriguez's next words made it clear that their rescue was only the beginning of understanding what had happened to them. "Mrs. Watson, I need to tell you that your daughters weren't alone on that boat," Rodriguez continued. "There were several other young women with them, and it appears that they were all being held as part of some kind of trafficking operation. The boat was apparently being used to transport these women somewhere, but it had developed engine problems and was stranded in international waters." Jessica felt sick as she realized what Captain Rodriguez was describing. Her daughters had been victims of human trafficking, held captive for 10 months while she had been searching for them and hoping for their safe return. "How do I get to them?" Jessica asked, her mind racing with questions about how to reach her daughters and get them the help they needed. Rodriguez explained that the situation was complicated because the rescue had taken place in international waters, and the women were currently in Mexico. He had already contacted the U.S. Coast Guard and the FBI about the situation, and federal agents were working on coordinating the rescue and investigation. "The authorities will be contacting you soon to help arrange for you to be reunited with your daughters," Rodriguez told Jessica. "But I wanted to call you myself because I know you've been looking for them, and I thought you deserved to hear the news as soon as possible." Jessica thanked Captain Rodriguez repeatedly, struggling to find words to express her gratitude to the man who had found her daughters and brought them to safety. Within hours of Rodriguez's call, Jessica was contacted by FBI agent Lisa Chen, who was coordinating the international response to the trafficking case. Agent Chen confirmed that Emma and Sarah Watson had indeed been found and were receiving medical care in Tijuana. "Mrs. Watson, your daughters are alive and they're going to be okay, but they've been through a terrible ordeal," Agent Chen told Jessica. were working with Mexican authorities to ensure they receive appropriate medical care and to arrange for their return to the United States as soon as they are stable enough to travel. Agent Chen explained that the trafficking case was complex and involved multiple law enforcement agencies from both the United States and Mexico. The boat where Emma and Sarah had been found was connected to a larger criminal organization that was involved in trafficking women throughout the region. Jessica was devastated to learn what her daughters had endured, but she was overwhelmed with relief and gratitude that they had been found alive. She immediately began making arrangements to travel to Tijuana to be reunited with Emma and Sarah. Emma, now 15, had been particularly affected by the experience, but was slowly beginning to respond to treatment and counseling. She was able to confirm that she and Sarah had been taken from Sunset Beach by men who had approached them while they were swimming and had forced them onto a boat. The investigation into the trafficking ring that had held Emma and Sarah captive continued for months, ultimately leading to the arrest of dozens of people involved in the criminal organization. The case revealed a sophisticated operation that had been trafficking women throughout California, Mexico, and other parts of the western United States for several years. Captain Rodriguez's decision to investigate the stranded boat and rescue the women on board had not only saved Emma and Sarah Watson, but had also exposed a major criminal enterprise and led to the rescue of dozens of other trafficking victims. The Watson family's ordeal made national news, highlighting both the dangers of human trafficking and the importance of never giving up hope in missing persons cases. Jessica's 10-month search for her daughters and Captain Rodriguez's heroic rescue became symbols of persistence and compassion in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. Emma and Sarah's recovery was gradual and required extensive medical treatment, psychological counseling, and family support. The girls had to readjust to normal life after 10 months in captivity, and they faced significant challenges in processing their traumatic experiences and rebuilding their sense of safety and normalcy. Jessica took an extended leave from her nursing job to focus on helping her daughters heal and recover. The family received support from victim services organizations and from the many people who had followed their story and had been moved by their reunion. 1 year after their rescue, Emma and Sarah had made remarkable progress in their recovery, though the effects of their traumatic experience would continue to influence their lives for years to come. Emma had returned to swimming, though she now preferred pool swimming to ocean swimming, and she had become involved with organizations that work to combat human trafficking. Sarah had decided to pursue a career in social work, inspired by her experience and by the people who had helped her family during their ordeal. She was particularly interested in working with other trafficking survivors and helping them navigate the challenges of recovery and reintegration. Jessica returned to her nursing career, but also became an advocate for missing persons, families, and trafficking survivors. She worked closely with law enforcement agencies to improve response protocols for missing persons cases and to raise awareness about the signs and risks of human trafficking. The cottage at Sunset Beach, which had been the site of so much anguish during the search for Emma and Sarah, became a place of healing and renewal for the family. They returned there regularly, not to relive the trauma of the girls' disappearance, but to celebrate their survival and to remember the importance of hope and persistence in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. Captain Miguel Rodriguez became a close friend of the Watson family, and he was honored by several organizations for his role in rescuing Emma and Sarah and exposing the trafficking ring. His decision to investigate a boat in distress had changed the lives of multiple families and had helped bring dangerous criminals to justice. The case also led to changes in how missing persons investigations were conducted, particularly in cases involving young people who disappeared from beaches or other recreational areas. Law enforcement agencies began paying more attention to the possibility that missing persons cases might be connected to human trafficking, and new protocols were developed for coordinating searches with anti-trafficking investigations. 2 years after their rescue, Emma and Sarah Watson had rebuilt their lives and were thriving despite the trauma they had experienced. Their story had become an inspiration to other families dealing with missing loved ones, proving that even in the most desperate circumstances, hope and determination could lead to miraculous outcomes. Emma, now 17, had become a competitive swimmer again and was being recruited by several colleges for their swim programs. She had also become a spokesperson for anti-trafficking organizations, sharing her story to raise awareness about the realities of human trafficking and the importance of supporting survivors. Sarah, now 19, was studying social work in college and was planning to specialize in working with trafficking survivors and missing persons' families. She had maintained contact with several of the other women who had been rescued from the boat with her and Emma, and she was committed to helping them rebuild their lives. Jessica had become a nationally recognized advocate for missing persons, families, and trafficking survivors. She testified before Congress about the need for better resources for families dealing with missing loved ones and about the importance of training law enforcement officers to recognize signs of human trafficking. The Watson family's story demonstrated that even the most devastating circumstances could ultimately lead to positive change and healing. Emma and Sarah's disappearance and rescue had exposed a major criminal enterprise, led to improvements in law enforcement procedures, and inspired countless people who were dealing with their own challenges and tragedies. The phone call from Captain Rodriguez had indeed changed everything. Jessica thought she knew about her daughter's disappearance, but it had also changed the lives of many other families and had helped make communities safer from the threats of human trafficking and other crimes. 3 years after their rescue, the Watson family established the Emma and Sarah Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and survivors of human trafficking. The foundation provided financial assistance, counseling services, and advocacy support to families dealing with similar situations. The foundation also funded research into improving search and rescue techniques for missing persons cases and supported training programs for law enforcement officers and other professionals who worked with trafficking survivors. Captain Rodriguez served on the Foundation's board of directors and continued to be involved in efforts to combat human trafficking and support missing persons, families. His fishing crew had also been recognized for their role in the rescue, and several of them became advocates for maritime safety and rescue operations. The case also led to increased cooperation between U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agencies in combating cross-border trafficking operations. The rescue of Emma and Sarah had provided valuable intelligence about how these criminal organizations operated and had helped authorities develop better strategies for preventing similar crimes. 4 years after their rescue, Emma and Sarah Watson had not only recovered from their traumatic experience, but had become powerful advocates for other survivors and missing persons' families. Their story continued to inspire people around the world and to demonstrate the importance of never giving up hope. Even in the most desperate circumstances, Emma had received a full scholarship to swim at a major university and was studying criminal justice with the goal of becoming an FBI agent, specializing in missing persons and trafficking cases. She credited her experience with giving her a unique understanding of what victims go through and a determination to help other families avoid similar ordeals. Sarah had graduated from college with a degree in social work and was working with a nonprofit organization that provided services to trafficking survivors. She had also written a book about her and Emma's experience, with proceeds going to support other survivors and missing persons. Families. Jessica had been promoted to head nurse at her hospital, but continued her advocacy work in her spare time. She had become a respected voice in the missing persons and anti-trafficking communities and was frequently invited to speak at conferences and training events. The cottage at Sunset Beach had been transformed from a place of tragedy into a symbol of hope and resilience. The Watson family continued to vacation there regularly, and they had established a small memorial garden on the property dedicated to all missing persons and their families. 5 years after that life-changing phone call from Captain Rodriguez, the Watson family reflected on their journey from despair to hope to healing and advocacy. Emma and Sarah's disappearance had been a nightmare that no family should have to endure, but their rescue and recovery had demonstrated the power of persistence, community support, and human compassion. Captain Rodriguez, now retired from commercial fishing, continued to be involved with maritime rescue operations and served as a volunteer with organizations that work to combat human trafficking. He often said that rescuing Emma and Sarah Watson had been the most important thing he had ever done in his life. The case had also led to technological improvements in search and rescue operations, including better coordination between different agencies and improved methods for tracking and investigating suspicious vessel activity in international waters. The phone call that had changed everything for the Watson family had also changed the lives of countless other people who had been touched by their story, or who had been helped by the advocacy work and policy changes that emerged from their experience. Emma and Sarah Watson's disappearance and rescue had proven that sometimes the most important phone calls come from strangers who choose to get involved, and that hope and determination can overcome even the most seemingly impossible circumstances. But the true depth of their story extended far beyond the headlines and the happy ending of their rescue. The 10 months that Emma and Sarah spent in captivity, the agonizing search that consumed Jessica's life, and the complex investigation that followed their rescue revealed layers of tragedy, resilience, and transformation that would take years to fully understand. During those first crucial weeks after the rescue, as Emma and Sarah recovered in a secure facility in San Diego, the full scope of what they had endured began to emerge through careful interviews with trauma specialists and FBI agents trained in working with trafficking survivors. The girls' ordeal had begun on that beautiful July morning at Sunset Beach, when they had swum out to their favorite spot among the rock formations. According to their testimony, they had been approached by a small speedboat that had seemed to appear from nowhere while they were exploring the underwater areas they loved. "We thought they were just other people enjoying the water," Sarah later told investigators. "The boat looked normal, and the men on it seemed friendly at first. They asked us if we were okay and if we needed any help getting back to shore." Emma, despite being the younger sister, provided crucial details about how the traffickers had initially gained their trust. They said they were part of a marine rescue organization and that they had been watching us swim, she recalled. "They said our mother had sent them to check on us because she was worried about the currents." The deception had been carefully planned and executed. The traffickers had obviously been observing the Watson family's routine for some time, learning about the girls' swimming habits and their mother's typical schedule. They had approached Emma and Sarah at the perfect moment, when the girls were far enough from shore that their screams couldn't be heard, but close enough to other boats that any struggle would have appeared to casual observers as playful interaction. "When we realized what was happening, it was too late," Sarah explained during one of her therapy sessions. "They had us on the boat, and we were already moving away from shore. We tried to jump overboard, but there were too many of them and they had weapons." The boat had taken Emma and Sarah to a larger vessel, anchored several miles offshore, where they discovered they were not the traffickers' only victims. The ship contained more than a dozen other young women and girls, some of whom had been held captive for years. Dr. Patricia Vance, the trauma specialist who worked extensively with Emma and Sarah during their recovery, explained to Jessica the psychological techniques that traffickers use to control their victims. "These criminals are experts at breaking down their victims' sense of identity and hope," Dr. Vance told Jessica during one of their sessions. "They use a combination of physical intimidation, psychological manipulation, and false promises to keep their victims compliant and prevent them from trying to escape." Emma and Sarah had been told repeatedly that their mother had stopped looking for them, that they had been forgotten, and that no one cared whether they lived or died. They were shown fake news reports claiming that the search for them had been called off, and that Jessica had given up hope of ever finding them. "The hardest part wasn't even the physical conditions," Emma told Dr. Vance. "It was believing that Mom had stopped caring about us. They showed us things on phones and tablets that made it look like Mom had moved on with her life and wasn't searching for us anymore." The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and carefully designed to break the girls' will to resist or attempt escape. They had been moved frequently between different locations, sometimes on ships, sometimes in warehouses or other buildings, making it impossible for them to get a sense of where they were or how they might get help. Sarah, being older, had attempted to protect Emma from the worst aspects of their captivity, often putting herself at risk to shield her younger sister from harm. This protective instinct had helped both girls survive, but it had also created additional trauma for Sarah, who carried guilt about not being able to prevent Emma's suffering entirely. Sarah was incredible, Emma told her mother during one of their early conversations after the rescue. "She never let me give up hope, even when things were at their worst. She kept telling me that you were still looking for us, and that we would get home somehow. The investigation into the trafficking ring that had held Emma and Sarah captive revealed the scope and sophistication of the criminal organization. FBI agent Chen, who led the investigation, discovered that the ring had been operating for over a decade and had victimized hundreds of young women and girls. This wasn't a small-time operation, Agent Chen explained to Jessica. This was a well-funded, highly organized criminal enterprise with connections throughout the western United States and Mexico. They had boats, safe houses, corrupt officials, and a network of people who helped them identify and target potential victims. The investigation revealed that Emma and Sarah had been targeted specifically because of their swimming routine at Sunset Beach. The traffickers had been watching the family for weeks, learning their patterns and waiting for the right opportunity to approach the girls when they were isolated and vulnerable. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, the fisherman whose decision to investigate a boat in distress had led to the girls' rescue, became deeply involved in the aftermath of their case. Rodriguez had been fishing in those waters for over 20 years, and he was haunted by the possibility that he might have encountered trafficking vessels before without recognizing what he was seeing. After I found those girls, I started thinking about all the boats I'd seen over the years that seemed a little bit off. Rodriguez told investigators, boats that didn't respond to radio calls, or that seemed to be avoiding other vessels, or that were in areas where they didn't really belong. I wonder now if some of those might have been part of this same operation. Rodriguez's experience led him to work with law enforcement agencies to train other fishermen and boat operators to recognize signs of trafficking vessels and suspicious maritime activity. His efforts resulted in the creation of a maritime awareness program that was adopted by fishing communities throughout California and Mexico. Captain Rodriguez didn't just save Emma and Sarah, Jessica often said when speaking about their case. He saved all the other girls who were on that boat, and his actions led to the exposure of a criminal organization that had been hurting people for years. He's a true hero. The legal proceedings against the trafficking ring were complex and lengthy, involving multiple jurisdictions and international cooperation between U.S. and Mexican authorities. The case required Emma and Sarah to provide testimony about their experiences, which was emotionally difficult but legally crucial for securing convictions. Jessica worked closely with victim advocates to ensure that her daughter's participation in the legal process didn't further traumatize them. Special accommodations were made to allow the girls to testify via video link, and they were provided with extensive support throughout the proceedings. We wanted Emma and Sarah to understand that their testimony was important for stopping these criminals and preventing other families from going through what we experienced, Jessica explained. But we also wanted to make sure that participating in the legal process didn't slow down their healing and recovery. The trials resulted in convictions for more than 30 people involved in the trafficking ring, including the boat operators who had taken Emma and Sarah from Sunset Beach. The sentences ranged from 15 years to life in prison, depending on each individual's role in the organization. The leader of the trafficking ring, a man named Eduardo Vasquez, was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing hearing, Jessica chose to address him directly, representing all the families who had been affected by his crimes. "You took my daughters from me for 10 months, Jessica told Vasquez. You made them believe that I had stopped loving them and that no one was looking for them. You tried to destroy their spirits and their hope, but you failed. Emma and Sarah are stronger than you could ever imagine, and they survived because of the love and hope that you couldn't take away from them." Vasquez showed no emotion during Jessica's statement, but several of the other trafficking survivors who attended the hearing were moved to tears by her words. Many of them had been helped by the Emma and Sarah Foundation, which had grown significantly in the years following the girls' rescue. The foundation had evolved beyond simply supporting trafficking survivors and missing persons' families. It had become a major force in advocating for stronger laws against human trafficking, improved training for law enforcement officers, and better resources for survivors trying to rebuild their lives. Emma, now 19, had become the foundation's most effective spokesperson, traveling around the country to speak at schools, conferences, and community events about the realities of human trafficking and the importance of awareness and prevention. A lot of people think that trafficking only happens to certain types of people, or in certain places, or under certain circumstances. Emma would tell audiences, but the truth is that it can happen to anyone. Sarah and I were ordinary teenage girls from a loving family, swimming at a beach we'd been going to our whole lives. We weren't runaways or kids in trouble. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, when criminals decided to target us. Emma's presentations were particularly powerful, because she was able to speak from personal experience about what trafficking really looked like and how it affected survivors. Her audiences often included parents, teachers, and law enforcement officers who gained new insights into how to recognize and respond to trafficking situations. Sarah, now 21, had chosen a different path for using her experience to help others. She had completed her degree in social work and was working directly with trafficking survivors, providing counseling and support services through a non-profit organization in San Diego. "I want to be there for other survivors in the way that I wish someone had been there for Emma and me," Sarah explained during an interview about her work. Sarah's work had brought her into contact with survivors from around the world, many of whom had experienced ordeals that were similar to or even worse than what she and Emma had endured. Through these connections, she had developed expertise in trauma recovery techniques and had become a sought-after consultant for organizations working with trafficking survivors. The sisters had also maintained relationships with several of the other women who had been rescued from the boat with them. These connections had been important for their recovery, as they provided mutual support and understanding that was difficult to find elsewhere. One of these survivors, a young woman named Maria Santos, who had been held by the trafficking ring for over 2 years, had become particularly close to the Watson family. Maria had no family of her own to return to after her rescue, and Jessica had welcomed her into their extended family network. "Maria is like another daughter to me," Jessica often said. "She went through the same ordeal as Emma and Sarah, and she helped take care of them during their captivity. She's part of our family now." Maria had worked closely with Sarah at the nonprofit organization, and she had also become involved with the foundation's advocacy work. Her longer experience with the trafficking ring had provided investigators with crucial information about how the organization operated and how it had evolved over the years. The impact of Emma and Sarah's case extended far beyond their immediate family and the other survivors who had been rescued with them. The case had led to significant changes in how missing persons investigations were conducted, particularly in coastal areas where trafficking by boat was a concern. Law enforcement agencies had developed new protocols for coordinating with maritime authorities when young people disappeared from beaches or other waterfront areas. Coast Guard procedures had been updated to include more systematic searches of suspicious vessels, and new technologies had been deployed to track and monitor boat traffic in areas where trafficking was suspected. The case had also influenced international cooperation on trafficking cases. The successful coordination between U.S. and Mexican authorities in Emma and Sarah's rescue had become a model for how countries could work together to combat cross-border trafficking operations. Emma and Sarah's case showed us that trafficking doesn't respect national boundaries, said Agent Chen during a conference on international law enforcement cooperation. The criminals who took them were operating in both U.S. and Mexican waters, and it took cooperation between our countries to bring them to justice and rescue their victims. 5 years after their rescue, Emma and Sarah had not only recovered from their traumatic experience, but had become leaders in the fight against human trafficking. They had testified before Congress about the need for stronger anti-trafficking laws and had worked with international organizations to improve protection for trafficking survivors. Emma had been accepted to law school and planned to specialize in prosecuting trafficking cases. She wanted to use her legal training to ensure that trafficking survivors received justice and that criminals faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. "I want to be in the courtroom when traffickers are prosecuted," Emma explained during an interview about her career plans. "I want them to see that their victims didn't just survive, we thrived, and we're fighting back." Sarah had been promoted to Director of Survivor Services at her nonprofit organization and was working to expand the organization's programs to serve more survivors throughout the region. She had also begun writing a book about her experience and her work with other survivors. Jessica had retired from nursing to work full-time with the Emma and Sarah Foundation, which had grown into a major nonprofit organization with offices in several states. The foundation's work had expanded to include prevention programs, survivor services, family support, and policy advocacy. The foundation had also established a scholarship program for survivors of trafficking and other violent crimes, helping them pursue education and career training that would enable them to rebuild their lives and achieve their goals. Captain Rodriguez had remained closely involved with the Watson family and the foundation's work. He had used his experience and reputation in the fishing community to establish a network of boat operators who watched for suspicious maritime activity and reported potential trafficking situations to authorities. "Finding Emma and Sarah changed my life," Rodriguez often said. "It made me realize that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other and to speak up when we see something that doesn't look right." Rodriguez's maritime awareness program had been credited with several subsequent rescues and had led to the identification and disruption of other trafficking operations. His work had earned him recognition from law enforcement agencies and advocacy organizations throughout the region. 6 years after the rescue, the Watson family reflected on their journey from tragedy to recovery to advocacy. Emma and Sarah's disappearance had been the worst experience of their lives, but their rescue and the work that had grown out of their experience had created meaning and purpose that helped them process their trauma. "We can't change what happened to us," Sarah said during a family interview, "but we can use our experience to help other people and to make sure that fewer families have to go through what we went through." The cottage at Sunset Beach, which had been the site of so much anguish during the search for Emma and Sarah, had been transformed into a place of healing and advocacy. The family still visited regularly, but now they brought other trafficking survivors and missing persons families there for retreats and support programs. "Sunset Beach will always be the place where we lost Emma and Sarah," Jessica reflected. "But it's also become a place where we help other families find hope and healing." That transformation has been important for all of us. The memorial garden that the family had established at the cottage had grown into a larger installation that honored all victims of trafficking and all missing persons. Visitors from around the world came to the garden to remember their own lost loved ones and to find inspiration in the Watson family's story of survival and recovery. 7 years after their rescue, Emma and Sarah Watson had become internationally recognized advocates for trafficking survivors and missing persons families. They had spoken at conferences on every continent and had advised governments and international organizations on how to improve their responses to trafficking crimes. Their story had been featured in books, documentaries, and academic studies about trafficking and recovery. They had used these opportunities to raise awareness about the realities of trafficking and to advocate for better support services for survivors. Emma had graduated from law school and was working as a prosecutor specializing in trafficking cases. Her first major prosecution had resulted in the conviction of a trafficking ring that had operated along the East Coast, and she had become known for her compassionate but determined approach to seeking justice for trafficking survivors. Sarah had completed a master's degree in social work and was pursuing a doctorate in trauma psychology. Her research focused on understanding how trafficking survivors recovered from their experiences and what factors contributed to successful long-term healing. Jessica had been appointed to serve on a national task force on missing persons and trafficking prevention. Her work with the task force focused on improving support services for families and developing better strategies for preventing trafficking crimes. The Emma and Sarah Foundation had grown into one of the largest and most respected organizations working on trafficking issues in the United States. The foundation operated programs in 12 states and had partnerships with organizations around the world. 8 years after that life-changing phone call from Captain Rodriguez, the Watson family's story continued to inspire people around the world. Their experience had shown that even in the most desperate circumstances, hope and determination could lead to miraculous outcomes, and that trauma could be transformed into purpose and advocacy. The phone call from Captain Rodriguez had indeed changed everything the Watson family thought they knew about Emma and Sarah's disappearance, but it had also changed the lives of thousands of other people who had been touched by their story or helped by the advocacy work that grew out of their experience. As Emma often said in her speeches, "Our story shows that no matter how dark things get, there's always hope. There are always people who care and who will fight for you. Sometimes those people are strangers, like Captain Rodriguez, and sometimes they're family members who never give up searching, but they're always there, and that's what keeps survivors going. The Watson sisters' disappearance and rescue had proven that love, determination, and the courage of individuals willing to get involved could overcome even the most carefully planned criminal enterprises. Their story would continue to inspire and protect others for generations to come, serving as a permanent reminder that hope should never be abandoned and that every person has the power to make a difference in the fight against injustice. 9 years after their rescue, Emma and Sarah Watson stood before the United Nations General Assembly, representing trafficking survivors from around the world. Their address to the international community focused on the need for global cooperation in combating trafficking and supporting survivors. Trafficking is not just a crime that affects individuals, Emma told the assembled delegates. It's a crime against humanity that requires a coordinated international response. Every country has a responsibility to protect vulnerable people and to support survivors in their recovery. Their UN address was watched by millions of people around the world and led to the adoption of new international protocols for combating trafficking and supporting survivors. The Watson sisters had become global symbols of survival and advocacy, using their platform to advocate for positive change. The story that had begun with a tragic disappearance from a California beach had evolved into a worldwide movement for justice and protection. Emma and Sarah Watson's experience had shown that even the most devastating circumstances could ultimately lead to meaningful change, and that the human spirit could triumph over even the most challenging adversities. Their journey from victims to survivors to advocates demonstrated the power of resilience, the importance of community support, and the potential for individual courage to change the world. The phone call from Captain Rodriguez had not only saved their lives, but had set in motion a series of events that would protect and inspire countless others for years to come.